I was on the show, and we had such good times together. I was probably 18, and Malcolm was probably 17, 16. I don't know. And we would take walks together, all of us, and pick up food, talk, played basketball, hung out on the weekends, went to parties together. He was so...
Incident took place on Sunday in Costa Rica. He was on a family vacation. He was swimming off of the coast of a town called Cocles in the province of Limon. He was swimming at Playa Grande. I mean, I've visited Costa Rica a few times. I was there with my family a few years ago, and those currents can be very strong.
NBC News has just confirmed that actor Malcolm-Jamal Warner has died at the age of 54. Authorities in Costa Rica telling NBC News that Warner accidentally drowned while swimming in the ocean on Sunday. Warner is best known for, of course, his Emmy-nominated role.
I just wanted to remind you, as I remind myself, that no matter what's going on, there's always a reason to smile. Like, if you just take a minute to stop and take stock, I guarantee you can find at least one reason to smile. And if for some reason you can't find a reason to smile, then that's probably the best time to be the reason for somebody else to smile. What's good? Yes, I got the flower in my hair. Today's my daughter's birthday. She put the flower there, so I'm rocking it. What? It's a beautiful day here in Atlanta. I just wanted to shout out and just spread some love and some good cheer. And, life is out here lifing, right? For me and for everybody else.
Really had was a multi-decade career in Hollywood, spanning several different shows. I did a little bit of research before this, and he had about 84 credits on his resume before passing away at just 54 years old. And TMZ also obtained photo, possibly the last photo of him that we may even have ever seen on TMZ.com at the airport on July 13th coming into Costa Rica. It's just so tragic to look at that photo and think that just a week later he'd be passing away.
They say the ocean doesn't lie, but in Hollywood, it's the silence that screams. Malcolm-Jamal Warner is dead at 54, and the headlines call an accident. A family vacation in Costa Rica, a quiet beach, a sudden current, a tragedy. But if you've been watching the industry long enough, you know this script feels all too familiar. Eddie Griffin's voice cracked as he called his friend a warrior. Not a co-star, not a brother, a warrior. And when someone like Griffin says they went to war with a machine, you should ask yourself, what were they fighting? And more importantly, who won? They say it happened on a quiet Sunday. Costa Rica, a family vacation, a warm beach, a calm ocean. Actor Malcolm-Jamal Warner, gone at 54. Authorities called it an accidental drowning. Another tragic headline, another moment of silence for a star we thought we'd have forever. But almost immediately, something about the story didn't sit right. It wasn't just the timing. It wasn't just the vague report. It was the way Eddie Griffin spoke his name. You could hear the tension in Griffin's voice, not just grief, but warning. He didn't say goodbye to a friend. He eulogized a warrior. We went to war with a Hollywood machine, Griffin said. Not metaphor, not nostalgia. That's a battlefield reference. And when someone who's been inside the belly of the beast starts talking like that, you'd be a fool not to listen. Because this wasn't just about a man lost in the waves. This was about a voice that had just started speaking more boldly, more publicly, more dangerously. Warner wasn't playing it safe anymore. He was questioning narratives, challenging media, defending legacy in a business that likes to rewrite it. And when artists, especially black artists, start talking too much about legacy, about control, about healing what the industry profits from keeping broken, it's never just art. It becomes a threat. So now the world is being told that Warner was simply swept away by a current. But those of us paying attention know how often that current seems to come right after someone stops playing by the rules. And as tributes pour in, that word, warrior, echoes louder than any obituary. Because maybe this wasn't just a loss. Maybe it was a message. And the question that lingers louder than ever is, message from who? According to the official timeline, Malcolm-Jamal Warner was on vacation in Costa Rica with his wife and daughter. It was supposed to be a break, no cameras, no press, just rest. They were staying in the province of Limon, a a lush and remote region known for its wildlife, seclusion, and notoriously strong ocean currents. On Sunday afternoon, they headed to Playa Grande near the town of Coweta, a beach as beautiful as it is unpredictable. Tourists visit for the peace. Locals avoid the water when the tide shifts. Warner, by all accounts, wasn't doing anything reckless. He wasn't cliff diving, wasn't drinking, wasn't jet skiing. He was simply swimming near the shore, with his family watching. That's when the narrative gets murky. Authorities say Warner got caught in a riptide and began struggling to stay afloat. Then, enter the unnamed rescuer, a 29-year-old man from Nicaragua, not connected to Warner in any personal way. Not a friend, not a bodyguard, not even a local guide. Just there, in the right place at the exact right time, apparently. He jumped in to save Warner, pulled him back toward shore, and was later hospitalized in critical condition. Then, days later, quietly discharged and vanished from the story. No press conference, no statement, no interviews. His name hasn't been released. No photos, no footage, nothing. In the age of smartphones and viral TikToks, this supposed hero disappeared without a trace, like a ghost. And yet, Warner's death has been neatly labeled a drowning, an accident, a closed case. But we're not just mourning a tragedy, we're parsing a mystery. Who is this man? Why was he there? Why has no one seen or heard from him since? Was he a passerby, a trained rescuer, or something else entirely? Why did Warner's family remain silent about him? Why has the media refused to investigate further? Because while Warner lay lifeless on the sand, emergency crews performed CPR for over 20 minutes. His pulse never came back. But the Nicaraguan man? Rescued, treated, stabilized, and gone. For someone who was supposedly on death's door, his recovery was curiously fast. Too fast. The kind of detail that doesn't just raise eyebrows, it raises alarms. And if the story of this rescue doesn't add up, maybe that's because it was never meant to be examined. Maybe it was just meant to be accepted. A tragic accident, a nameless hero, an unspoken ending. But when someone like Malcolm-Jamal Warner dies while he's building something powerful, something intentional, something real, you have to ask, why does the most mysterious man in the story get the cleanest escape? Here's what doesn't fit the narrative they're selling you. Malcolm-Jamal Warner wasn't fading. He wasn't a washed-up sitcom star clinging to nostalgia. He was rising, quietly, deliberately, and with purpose. Over the last year, he had begun shifting his public image. Not as Theo Huxtable, the lovable kid from The Cosby Show, but as a thinker, a questioner, a cultural analyst, and more than anything, a storyteller on his own terms. His podcast, Not All Hood, was the clearest evidence of that transformation. It wasn't just another celebrity vanity project. It was intimate, raw, and painfully honest. Warner was unpacking the trauma behind black masculinity, the media's obsession with villainizing black men, and the generational scars Hollywood refuses to acknowledge. He didn't care about appeasing corporate sponsors or pandering to industry gatekeepers. He was reclaiming his narrative and, by extension, helping others do the same. In recent episodes, he spoke about legacy, not as something you inherit, but something you fight to define. He talked about the mental health toll of being a black actor constantly reduced to your past. He pushed back against the safe version of himself the public was used to. This wasn't Theo anymore. This was a man who'd survived the machine, seen the cost of silence, and was now ready to say what needed to be said, even if it made people uncomfortable. Not All Hood was doing what most platforms wouldn't dare, calling out the systems that commodify black culture while erasing the pain behind it. Warner was giving a voice to artists who had been muted, misrepresented, or discarded. And he wasn't asking for permission. That's what made him dangerous. Because Warner wasn't just reflecting on his own past. He was actively reworking the present. And the industry doesn't like when you step out of your box. When you stop playing the role. When you start speaking not just for yourself, but to the system. Especially when your voice still carries the kind of credibility and warmth that made you beloved for decades. This wasn't a man fading into irrelevance. This was a man stepping into power. A man finally controlling the lens through which his legacy would be seen. And now, just as that voice was becoming sharper, bolder, and more unfiltered, it's gone. So ask yourself, why now? This isn't the first time we've seen something like this. And if history has taught us anything about Hollywood, it's that nothing is ever just a coincidence. Because when you look closely, a disturbing pattern starts to emerge. A pattern of water, of drowning, of voices going silent, without a struggle, without a bruise, without a single question asked. Let's go back. Prince, a revolutionary artist who spent decades fighting for ownership of his name, his masters, and his creative freedom. He warned us repeatedly about the evils of the music industry, about how artists are exploited, discarded, or drugged into compliance. And then, just as he was regaining control of his catalog, he was found dead in an elevator. The story changed several times. The final answer? Accidental overdose. No foul play. Sam Cooke. The smooth voice behind "A Change Is Gonna Come." But behind the velvet tone was a radical mind. A businessman forming his own label, demanding royalties, speaking on civil rights, unafraid to challenge the system. Then one night, he was shot in a seedy motel, half naked and allegedly confused. The official story? He was acting erratically. He was out of control. No investigation. Just shame. Just silence. Naya Rivera, young, talented, outspoken, called out racism in the industry, criticized the sanitized narratives Hollywood tried to place on Latinx and black actresses. Then one summer afternoon, she took her son out on a lake and never came back. A calm, experienced swimmer. Found days later, lifeless but otherwise untouched. Official cause of death? Drowning. Whitney Houston, and then Bobby Christina, mother and daughter. Both found submerged. Both declared accidental deaths, surrounded by whispers of addiction, instability, emotional pain. But if you listen to Whitney's interviews in the years before her death, really listened, you'd hear someone trying to claw her way out of a prison. Someone who knew too much. Someone being watched. So tell me, how many times can we see the same script play out before we call it what it is? Drowning. It's clean, quiet, symbolic. You disappear into water, your body often recovered days later, your story written for you. No visible trauma, no bullet holes, no messy crime scenes, just grief and closure and the gentle language of accident. And more often than not, it happens after something changes. After the artist finds their voice. After they stop cooperating. After they say one too many things the wrong people don't want said. Malcolm-Jamal Warner had reached that point. He was no longer playing nice. He was no longer playing safe. And just like so many others who dared to disrupt the narrative, he too met a strangely serene, disturbingly convenient end. Pulled out of the water. No signs of struggle. No major headlines. Just a few whispers and then a pause. Because that's how they do it now. There's another layer to all this. One most people are afraid to talk about. Malcolm-Jamal Warner wasn't just an actor. He wasn't just a thinker or a podcast host. He was the last living bridge to one of the most complicated legacies in Black American pop culture, The Cosby Show. For millions of us, that show wasn't just television. It was a cultural revolution, a well-dressed, jazz-scored rebellion against every stereotype we had been fed about Black families. It gave us Cliff Huxtable, the warm and wise father figure. It gave us educated, successful Black children. And right in the middle of it all, it gave us Theo, the imperfect, relatable son who learned and grew alongside an entire generation. And when the empire collapsed, when Bill Cosby fell from grace, when the reruns were pulled, when the legacy became a cultural landmine, Warner was the only one who stayed standing. Quiet, grounded, real. But what made him dangerous wasn't that he defended Cosby the man. He didn't. He explicitly distanced himself from the scandal, making it clear he had no part in Cosby's alleged crimes. What he did defend, though, was the impact of the work, the value of the show, the importance of what it meant to millions of Black viewers, especially in a world where positive, complex Black fatherhood was nearly non-existent on screen. And that, right there, is what made him uniquely threatening. He refused to let them burn it all down. He refused to throw away the art just because the artist was flawed. He stood in the messy middle, acknowledging the pain while protecting the power. And Hollywood hates the middle. They prefer extremes, villains or victims, canceled or cleansed. But Warner was more interested in truth than optics, more interested in healing than erasure. That's the role he had grown into, not just a former child star, but a custodian of cultural memory. Someone who carried the full weight of The Cosby Show, its brilliance and its baggage, and refused to let white media dictate how that story would be told. He had the credibility of lived experience, the articulation of a scholar, and the heart of someone who'd seen too much to be naive anymore. He didn't fit their narrative, and he didn't play their game. Malcolm-Jamal Warner was becoming the kind of black man the industry doesn't know what to do with. One who won't sell out, won't shut up, and won't let them rewrite history for convenience. A man who could speak to the youth and the elders, who stood between what was and what could be. And now that voice is gone. By 2025, Not All Hood wasn't just a podcast. It was a manifesto. A subtle, sophisticated rebellion wrapped in warm tones and soulful production. Malcolm-Jamal Warner wasn't yelling. He wasn't ranting. He was reflecting, sharply, intelligently, and dangerously. Every episode peeled back another layer of the illusion. He wasn't chasing celebrity interviews or viral moments. He was dissecting the trauma of black identity in America, especially inside the entertainment industry. He spoke about the silent contracts black artists sign just to stay visible, the emotional tax of smiling through exploitation, the way Hollywood doesn't just own your image, it tries to own your story, your wounds, your legacy. He challenged the system's obsession with pain, how the industry profits off black suffering while punishing black healing. He called out how networks rush to greenlight shows about slavery, drugs, and dysfunction, but quietly bury anything that centers strength, softness, or introspection. That wasn't an accident, he said. That was design, programming the public to see blackness through a narrow, commodified lens. And most threatening of all, he talked about cultural theft, the way black creativity is mined, marketed, and sold back to us, often without credit, context, or compensation. He wasn't just pointing fingers at white executives. He was holding everyone accountable. He questioned our heroes. He examined our silence. He asked what we were willing to trade just to belong in rooms that weren't built for us. This wasn't Theo Huxtable anymore. This was Malcolm-Jamal Warner as a media force. Independent, unfiltered, self-funded. A man who didn't need a network because he was the network. He had the voice, the vision, and the reputation to command attention, and the wisdom to know exactly what to do with it. That's what Hollywood fears most. Not nostalgia, not reruns, not old sitcom stars trying to stay relevant. They fear revolution. The kind that starts quietly, with one man refusing to play along. The kind that spreads when someone with nothing left to prove starts speaking the truth others were too scared to say. And that's exactly what Not All Hood was becoming. A digital underground railroad for uncomfortable truth. A space too powerful to control, too smart to dismiss. Warner wasn't trying to be famous anymore. He was trying to be free. And he wanted everyone listening to believe they could be too. But freedom like that? In a system built on silence? That's a threat. When Eddie Griffin took the stage to honor Malcolm-Jamal Warner, it wasn't your typical Hollywood eulogy. There were no empty platitudes, no vague nostalgia, no polished PR script designed to smooth over controversy. Instead, there was a pause, a breath, a look that said, I know what this is, and I know you know too. And then he said the words, we went to war with the machine. Not we worked together. Not he was like a brother. Not we made each other laugh. No, Griffin, an industry veteran, a truth teller with nothing left to lose, used wartime language. We went to war with a machine. That doesn't come from sitcom friendships. That comes from shared survival. From years of battling invisible hands, backroom politics, and whispered threats. From watching your peers disappear, derail, or destroy themselves trying to stay afloat in an industry that feeds on compliance and kills off resistance. Griffin didn't name names. He didn't have to. He spoke in code, the way black men have done for centuries when the truth is too dangerous to say aloud. His tone wasn't just sorrow, it was sharp. His words didn't just honor Warner, they warned us. Because beneath the tribute was a message for anyone who's been in the game long enough to recognize the pattern. They got him, not in a shootout, not in a scandal, not with handcuffs or headlines, but with silence, with water, with accident, with mystery. Griffin's tribute was laced with grief, yes, but also with defiance. He spoke of Warner's mind, his refusal to play Hollywood's game, his hunger to build something outside of the machine. And then he reminded us, pointedly, that they don't like that. They don't like when you stop asking for permission. They don't like when you build your own stage. It was almost like Griffin was passing a torch, or maybe lighting a flare, a way of saying, if you're one of us, if you're awake, then don't be fooled by how clean they made it look. Don't be lulled by the calm face they put on this tragedy. Because underneath all the kind words and posthumous praise, there was a man who had become a liability, not to his community, but to the system. A man who dared to challenge the status quo, and who paid the price in the most polite, palatable way possible. And Eddie? He knows. He's seen it before. He's walked that tightrope himself, speaking just enough truth to shake the room, but never quite enough to get erased. Until now, it was all comedy, all metaphor. But at Warner's memorial, the gloves came off. That phrase, "we went to war with the machine," wasn't just about the past. It was a challenge to the living, a reminder that the war is still happening, that the machine is still humming, and that anyone who dares to speak against it should be prepared for what happens next. Because this wasn't just a loss, it was a message. And now, all we're left with are questions. Questions the media won't ask. Questions the industry won't touch. Questions that hang in the air like fog, refusing to clear. Why was Malcolm-Jamal Warner in such a remote part of Costa Rica to begin with? He wasn't some impulsive thrill seeker. He was deliberate, grounded, intentional. So what drew him there, off-grid, off-camera, off-script? Was it just a vacation? Or was he meeting someone, running from something, or about to expose something? And then, there's the drowning itself. Where are the cameras? The phone footage? The vacation selfies? We live in a world where strangers film fast food fights, where influencers live stream their morning coffee. But somehow this happens with zero footage? No security camera, no beachgoer TikTok, no last Instagram story, not even a timestamp. We're told a young Nicaraguan man pulled him from the water, but no name, no interview, no photo. He disappears as quickly as he appeared, treated and discharged. That's it, just a ghost in the narrative. But if he was brave enough to save a man's life, why not speak? Why hasn't the press followed up? Why hasn't anyone? Then there's the autopsy. Rushed. Closed. No toxicology panel released to the public. No second opinion. And the family? Silent. Pressured? Grieving? Protected? Or protecting someone? Because here's the truth that keeps clawing at the edge of this story. Malcolm-Jamal Warner wasn't in the spotlight. But he was in the way of false narratives. In the way of media machines that profit from broken black men, not evolved ones. In the way of an industry that wants control, not consciousness. Would he still be here if he had stayed quiet? If he had made one more sitcom appearance and one less podcast episode? If he'd leaned into nostalgia instead of challenging the present? We'll never know. And maybe that's the point. Because in this business, silence isn't just encouraged, it's enforced. And when silence doesn't work, erasure follows. But Malcolm-Jamal Warner wasn't erasing himself. He was writing a new chapter. One they couldn't edit, couldn't soften, couldn't spin. And now he's gone. But the questions remain. And the rest of us? We're left staring at a calm ocean and wondering what really pulled him under. Malcolm-Jamal Warner was never chasing fame. He already had that. He lived that. He knew what it cost and what it covered up. What he was chasing in these last years was truth. Unpolished, unbranded, unbought. He wasn't just reflecting on his past. He was reclaiming it. Not for applause, but for clarity, for legacy, for those coming next. His podcast, Not All Hood, wasn't nostalgic. It was insurgent. A quiet rebellion wrapped in deep conversation and emotional honesty. It didn't scream. It didn't shock. It didn't need to, because when a man who survived the machine starts naming its gears, people listen, and the machine gets nervous. He wasn't bitter. He was brave. He wasn't ranting. He was reframing. He wasn't fading. He was rising. And that, more than anything, may have signed his death warrant. Because in Hollywood, you can age out. You can be forgotten. You can even be broken in public. But what you can't do is wake people up. You can't start talking about who really owns your image. You can't start questioning why certain pain sells. You can't start building your own platform where the industry can't mute you. Because the second you do, you're not a veteran anymore. You're a liability. So now we're left with a hard, bitter question. Is this the price of truth in Hollywood? And if it happened to Malcolm-Jamal Warner, a man who spent decades being safe, polite, palatable, what happens when someone less polished speaks up? What happens when someone without a Cosby legacy behind them starts pulling back the curtain? Who protects them? Who listens before it's too late? Because this doesn't end with Malcolm. It starts with him. He left behind a blueprint, a voice, a question, a challenge. And now it's on us to remember him not just as Theo Huxtable, but as a man who tried to speak truth in a town built on silence. To revisit his podcast, not just to mourn him, but to understand why he had to die quietly, far from the cameras, far from the headlines, with the narrative tied up in a bow, before we could ask the right questions. Because we are in a moment now where truth costs lives, where exposure gets punished, where healing becomes radical. So if Malcolm-Jamal Warner's voice was silenced mid-sentence, who's next? And more importantly, will we be brave enough to hear them while they're still alive?